3 years, 11 months, and 6 days. That was how long I had been at Drevholt before she walked through the salt-flat gate in a gray coat with her ledger under one arm, and a long measuring rod propped over her shoulder like a soldier carrying a pike. I was watching from the upper gallery of the garrison wall, which is where I watched most things now. The harbor was below, locked in its winter pallor. The water in the outer bay had gone the color of old pewter, and the fishing vessels that worked the channel in autumn had pulled in for the season, their hulls lined up along the inner pier in a row of salt-bleached timber and furled canvas. The salt flats spread south of the town wall in long white terraces, cracked at the edges where the freeze had got into the brine channels overnight. Frostlace rimmed the drainage mouths. A winter circuit assessor would come eventually. They always came once a year to record the yield and set the levy for the northern circuit. I had known it would be soon. I had told myself I would stay in the East Tower when they arrived, keep to the upper rooms, let Warden Hale handle the meetings and the ledger signing. That was how I had handled the last 3 visits, a signature on the appropriate pages, a note through Hale, no direct contact. Then I saw her. She did not look up at the wall. She moved straight to the first terrace stake, set her rod beside it, and wrote something in her book without so much as glancing at the garrison gate behind her, which was still swinging shut. She had let herself in. The gate was technically latched. She had known the trick of the latch, the slight upward pressure before the handle, which suggested she had been to coastal posts like this before. She was not new to the circuit. Everything about how she moved said she had done this exact thing, in exactly this kind of cold, at exactly this kind of garrison, 100 times. I stayed where I was longer than I had intended. My name is Breck of Drevholt, or that is what I call myself here, the name I use for ledger signing and garrison orders. My full name belongs to a court I have not returned to in 4 years. The Alpha King of Kelrath has not been seen at the stone table in 4 years, and the packs that still owe him fealty have quietly stopped waiting for him. Some believe he is dead. Some believe he chose exile. A few of the sharper council members know approximately where he is. None of them have come. I think they decided at some point in the 3rd year that whatever I was working through was better worked through without them, and they are not wrong. The truth is something I cannot explain to a council or a court physician, because what I carry is not a wound and it is not a sickness, and the healers who have tried to treat it have left shaken and, in 2 cases, badly hurt, though that was not something I did. That was something the thing inside me did in the 1st year, before I learned how much warning it gave before it surfaced. It is not my wolf. My wolf is ordinary and large and old, and has slept under my bed for 23 years without incident. What surfaced 4 years ago, after the night of the Kelrath Iron ceremony, is something older than my wolf, something that runs in the blood of my line the way a deep channel current runs beneath a river, visible only when the surface is torn open. I have read everything the Drevholt Library holds about what I carry. I sent to Felport for 3 additional texts in the 2nd year, and to the Southern Archive at Kale's Hold the year after that. The word the old texts use is Vareth, a war form, not a second wolf. Something the earliest Kelrath kings carried as a weapon and learned, over generations, to suppress. A survival form, the oldest text called it, the thing a bloodline develops when it has been threatened long enough and deep enough that the body decides to become something the threat cannot manage. In me, the suppression failed. Why it failed when I was 38 years old and not before, I do not know. The ceremony is the obvious candidate. Something in the iron ceiling, or the shift in my blood that comes with the formal alpha claim, something in that night opened a door that had been latched for generations. What came through, it was not something I had been prepared for, and it was not something the court healers knew how to manage. So I came here, to the far northern harbor, to a garrison town that sells salt and dried fish, and does not ask many questions of the lord who occupies its east tower, and pays his garrison costs on time and without complaint. Drevholt was not a calculated choice. I came north because north was away from Kelrath, and away from Kelrath was the only direction I had in the first months. I stopped here because the garrison East Tower had a north-facing window and a good archive, and a warden who asked nothing except that the garrison costs be paid, and those were the only requirements I had for a place to stop. I have learned in 4 years the particular shape of a life organized around something you carry. It is not a bad life, I want to be clear about that. It is a careful life. It is a life of known quantities and managed distances and routines that the Vareth has learned to accept. I walk the harbor at the same time each morning. I work in the archive in the same chair, at the same table, with the same window light falling at the same angle. I eat in my rooms. I do not have visitors who are not expected. I have removed, one by one, every unnecessary variable, until what remains is a garrison that runs well and a lord who watches from the wall and wolves that are at a comfortable distance. It is not the life I had intended, but it is orderly and it is mine, and until 3 years, 11 months, and 6 days ago, I had not thought seriously about whether it might become something else. The wolves have kept distance. 3 of them had followed me north, old pack wolves, loyal ones, the kind that will follow their alpha through things they do not understand because they trust the blood pool more than they trust their own fear. For the first 2 years they stayed close. When the Vareth surfaced badly the 3rd time, all 3 withdrew. They are still in the garrison. They sleep in the south stable, warm enough, fed well, exercised by the garrison hands every morning in the outer court. They do not come to the East Tower anymore. I do not blame them. The woman with the measuring rod had moved to the 3rd terrace now, and she was on her knees in the frozen salt crust with her face close to the brine channel, examining something I could not see from this distance. She wore leather-work gloves with the wrists folded down, and her coat was good quality but old. The collar had been restitched at some point, and the hem on the right side was slightly longer than the left, suggesting it had been let down and not quite evened. She was alone. No assistant, no courier, no garrison guide. She had come through the gate and begun her work as though the garrison gate and the salt flat beyond it were entirely familiar to her, and looked, from the gallery wall, exactly like a woman who had no idea that the garrison East Tower was occupied by something that occasionally tore its own furniture apart. I went inside. Warden Hale met me in the corridor below the gallery stairs, which told me he had been watching too. He is a good warden, Hale. A former pack fighter from the western coast who came to Drevholt because he was tired of fighting and found the salt trade suits him. He has worked for me for 3 years and has learned, as much as anyone can learn this particular thing, what it means when I go very still in a conversation. She is the circuit assessor, he said. Saren Lath comes out of the Fen Coast Circuit originally, transferred to the northern route about 8 years ago. She has done Drevholt twice before, both times before you arrived. Old Warden Preth dealt with her. He left a note in the archive saying she was efficient and thorough and did not overstay. He paused. She has asked to be quartered in the East Annex. The East Annex shares a wall with the East Tower. Give her the common quarters, I said. She has specified the East Annex. She said she prefers to work close to the archive. Then give her the East Annex. I do not know why I said that. The sensible choice was the common quarters, the far end of the garrison, the wing that shares nothing with my rooms, the maximum predictable distance. I said it anyway. Keep her away from the tower stairs. If she needs archive access after dark, she sends word to you and you retrieve the records. Hale nodded. He has a talent for accepting the decisions I make without asking me to justify them. In a warden, this is worth more than I can say. I spent the rest of that afternoon in the tower archive, which is where I do most of my work during the cold months. It has a good north-facing window, and the cold keeps it quiet, and the shelves have accumulated, over the years, enough of the kind of reading I find useful that I can lose 3 hours there without noticing. I was pulling the year's yield summaries so they would be ready for the assessor, minimizing the time she would need to spend anywhere near my rooms. It is not that I believe I cannot control the Vareth. It is that I have learned not to trust situations I have not controlled in advance. New people, unexpected arrivals, disruptions to the routine I have built around myself. These are exactly the conditions under which the Vareth has surfaced before. I did not know this woman. I did not know her reactions. I could not predict what she would do if she encountered something she had not expected. The records were in better order than I expected. Hale's predecessor had kept poor files, loose pages, unlabeled chests, 3 years of yield data mixed in with old quarry assessments in a chest that smelled of river damp. Hale himself is methodical. The last 3 years were clean and columned and cross-referenced to the levy schedule. I pulled the relevant years, sorted them on the archive table, and sat down to wait. What I heard instead from the corridor outside the archive door was a knock. Not Hale's knock. He knocks twice, briskly, the knock of a man who has something to report. This was one knock, a single firm tap, and then, yield records for Drevholt last 8 years. Are they in this archive or in the East Wing store? I sat very still. The archive, I said. May I come in? I had not locked the door. I do not usually lock doors. I find it changes nothing when the thing inside me surfaces, because doors are not what it stops for. But I had also not expected anyone to knock on this particular door without going through Hale first. The East Annex was on the far side of the ground corridor from the archive. She had found it without a guide. The records are sorted on the table, I said. Warden Hale will bring them to the common hall in the morning. A pause. I would rather collect them myself if you do not mind. I like to know where my records come from. Another pause, shorter. I am the circuit assessor, Saren Lath. I was told to avoid the tower stairs, which I have done. I am on the ground corridor. She was polite, precise about the geography, which told me she had already mapped the garrison in her head, East Annex, ground corridor, the archive door 1 turn left of the tower stair base. She had not gone where she was told not to go. She had simply found the next closest door and knocked on it. I stood, I went to the door. I opened it 6 inches and looked at her through the gap. She was shorter than she had appeared from the wall. Or perhaps it was simply that she was standing closer than I was used to standing from people. Her hair was loose at the back, the kind of loose that says it was pinned this morning and has been coming undone since noon. She had a leather folio tucked under her arm and a small ink bottle she was capping with her thumb as she stood there, which told me she had been taking notes since she came in from the flats and had not stopped yet. Her eyes, when they met mine through the gap, were calm. Not careful, not wary, not the controlled stillness of someone who has been warned about the Lord of the East Tower and is now performing composure. Just calm. The way a person is calm who has stood at 100 garrison doors and found nothing on the other side that surprised them very much. The records are on the table, I said again. Thank you, she waited. I opened the door the rest of the way and stepped back. She came in without hurrying. She went straight to the table, set down her folio, uncapped her ink bottle again and began looking at the top file. She did not look at me. She did not look around the room at the shelves or the window or the candle holder on the corner bracket that I had not replaced since the wax ran out last week. She read. I sat back down in the chair on my side of the table and watched her. She worked for 40 minutes. In 40 minutes she spoke exactly twice, once to ask whether the quarry levy was cross-referenced anywhere in the yield files or held in a separate folder, and once to note that the second-year channel yield appeared to have a recording gap. Was it a gap in the record or an actual production loss that year? I answered both questions. The quarry levy was in a separate folder, which I retrieved from the shelf behind me without thinking. The second-year gap was a recording failure. I knew the actual yield from memory, which made her look up at me for just a moment before writing it down. Good memory, she said. It was a bad yield year, the kind that stays. She nodded and went back to her notes. When she finished, she stacked the files back in the order she had found them, not the order I had sorted them in, but a slightly different order that I could tell, from a glance, was actually more logical for referencing by channel rather than by year. She stood up and capped her ink bottle. "Thank you," she said. "I should have most of the flat assessment done by tomorrow midday. I may need to return for the channel rebuild records. Send word to Warden Hale." "I will." She picked up her folio. She walked to the door and then she stopped and looked back at me, not cautiously, directly. "The garrison wolves," she said. "I passed them in the south stable when I came in. They looked quiet, quieter than garrison wolves usually are. A beat." "Is that how they usually are, or is this the time of year for it?" I felt something shift in the back of my chest, not the Varith, something else. "This is how they usually are," I said. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she nodded once, the way she nodded when she had confirmed something she had already noted in her folio, and went out. I sat in the archive until the candle had burned 3 inches lower. Then I put the files back on the shelf and went upstairs. The Varith did not surface that night. It did not surface the next morning either, when I could hear her through the east annex wall, the scrape of her chair across stone, the occasional soft murmur that I decided she was either using to think through her tallies or directing at herself as a reminder not to miss a column. I stood at my window and watched her work the north terraces, where the oldest channels were. The north channels were worked before Drevholt was a garrison town, before there was a wall around it or a salt lord in the east tower. They were cracked at the edges in formations that looked, from above, like dried sea lace, and she was careful with them. She stepped around the most fragile edges of the crust and did not put her rod down into the channels but measured the surface with a folded cord instead. She knew what the old channels were. She was treating them accordingly. I found myself at the window more than I should have been. I am not someone who watches things without purpose. I watch the harbor for weather, the pack roads for late couriers, the wolf light in the south stable to know whether my wolves are calm or agitated. What I was doing at the window was not any of those things. I went back to the archive. She came to the archive corridor on the second morning, not to knock, but to leave a note under the door for Hale, which I only knew because I heard her boots stop outside and then walk away again. The note asked for the channel records from the South Flat, the years when the secondary outlet was rebuilt. It was signed with a capital S, and a postscript that said she had left dried cod from the harbor stall in the common hall kitchen if anyone wanted it. I ate in my rooms. I was aware of eating in my rooms. In the 3 previous annual visits, I had not been aware of eating in my rooms. On the 3rd morning, the Varith surfaced. It did not surface badly, and I have learned in 4 years that there are degrees. The worst is the kind that takes the room with it, the furniture, whatever I was holding. I have replaced the table in the East Tower study 3 times. The middle kind is confined to whatever space I am in, manageable if I am alone, controllable in the sense that I know where it is going and I can get to a corridor and move the breakable things before it arrives. This was the mild kind. The kind I feel in my jaw first, a tightening, a heat, then behind my eyes, then across the tops of my hands. The kind that says the thing inside me has noticed something I did not notice myself and is deciding whether it matters. I was in the East Tower stairwell. I had been going down for the morning order check with Hale. The Varith surfaced on the 3rd step from the bottom. I stopped, put my back to the wall. I know better than to go anywhere when the heat is in my hands. What I heard from the direction of the East Annex, which shares the stairwell wall at its far corner, was a voice. Her voice. She was talking to someone. One of the garrison hands, I thought, or Hale. And then I heard her say there now in the low, unhurried way that a person says to something that cannot answer back, and I understood she was talking to the garrison cat. The heat in my hands receded by half. I did not move. I stood with my back to the stairwell wall and listened to Saren Lath tell a garrison cat, in a perfectly ordinary voice, that the cold in the overnight channels was making the crust buckle on the east edge, but she had taken the measurement before it shifted so the records would be accurate, and that the cat looked as though it had been living on better fish than the garrison hands, which was probably the right choice. The Varith went quiet. Not gone, it never goes entirely, not anymore, but quiet. The way a thing goes quiet when whatever agitated it has been replaced by something it does not know what to do with. I stood in the stairwell for another 2 minutes. Then I went down to the order check, and Hale looked at my hands and then at my face, and I said it's fine, and he accepted that, because that is what we do. I did not tell him what had happened. I did not tell him that a woman talking to a cat in the next corridor had done what 3 years of controlled routine and 2 different healers and 1 very expensive text from the Southern Archive had not managed. Made the Varith simply decide it was not interested in surfacing today. I went to the harbor in the afternoon. Walking the harbor is part of my routine. The cold and the sound of the water are useful to me. They give the Varith something to measure itself against, and the harbor workers have long since learned to simply acknowledge me and continue their work, which is exactly the kind of ordinary I need. I was on the end of the longest pier, watching the winter ice on the North Channel make its slow, deliberate push toward the open water, when I heard boots on the pier planking behind me. She stopped 6 feet back. I did not turn. The harbor assessor told me the yield goes down in years when the ice pushes early, she said. I wanted to see it. It pushes early when the high current shifts, I said. The fish follow the current south. The harbor workers follow the fish. She came up beside me. Not close, she stood at the rail with a gap of 2 feet between us, which was the ordinary distance a person stands from someone they have met 3 times and do not yet know well. She looked at the ice. You grew up watching this. I grew up somewhere else, I said. I learned to watch it here. She considered that. Then, the records in the archive go back 60 years. Your name appears in them for the last 4. Warden Preth's name for 12 years before that. She was not accusing me of anything. She was simply noting what the records contained. You came from somewhere with better records than most garrison lords keep. Someone taught you how to run a file archive. A court secretary, I said. A long time ago. She nodded. She looked at the ice for a long moment, watching the slow grind of the shelf edge against the older formation below it. Then she said, I have been on the Northern Circuit for 8 years. I have worked out of 23 different garrison posts. Some of them are well run and the lord of the post is never visible. Some of them are run badly and the Lord is everywhere explaining why. She paused. Yours is the first where the garrison runs well, and the wolves are quiet, and the Lord watches from the wall. I turned and looked at her. She was still looking at the ice. Her profile was calm in the winter light, the loose hair, the folded collar, the ink stain on the side of her right hand that she had not noticed, or had noticed, and did not consider worth attending to. She did not look like someone making a pointed observation. She sounded like someone thinking aloud, the way a person does when they trust the person beside them not to take it badly. The wolves are quiet because they have learned to be, I said. It is better for them. She turned then and looked at me, not with the careful look that people give me when they are trying to assess what I am, the look that says they have heard something and are deciding what to do with the information. She looked at me the way she had looked at the ice channel, steadily, without hurry, with the air of someone who intends to understand what she is looking at before she decides anything about it. Better for them, she said, or better for you. No one had asked me that before. In 4 years, through Hale and the garrison hands and the 2 healers, and the handful of pack representatives who had made the journey north to ask me to come home, no one had asked me that. Both, I said. It was the most honest answer. They are frightened of what comes out of me. If they are not nearby when it comes out, they are frightened at a distance instead, which is easier for everyone. She looked at me for another 3 seconds. Then she looked back at the ice. My grandmother had it, she said. The old war form. My mother saw it twice before she understood what it was. She said it the way she said everything, plainly, without performance, without the weight of a dramatic revelation. We are a salt trade family. My grandmother was a circuit assessor before me, and before her my great-grandmother worked the channels in the East Coast settlements. None of them were wolves. The form is not wolf, is it? She glanced at me. No, I said. The old texts call it Vareth, she said. My grandmother used a different word, the blood tide. She said it felt like a tide going out much too fast. She learned to feel it coming about 12 minutes before it arrived. 12 minutes. My window is shorter than that, 7, sometimes 8, if the trigger is gradual and not sudden. But the shape of it was exactly right. The recession before the surge. The feeling of something pulling back in my chest before it breaks outward. The first time I had ever heard someone describe it from the inside who had not read it from a text. She had it her whole life, I asked. Yes, she turned and looked at me again. She died at 81. She worked the salt circuits until she was 74. She was married for 52 years. She said it without sentiment, just the facts arranged plainly in the order that would be most useful to me. She learned what set it off and she learned what quieted it, and she worked around both. I had never spoken to anyone who had known a person with the Vareth. The 2 healers who came knew the texts. The court physicians knew the theory. No one had known someone who lived with it and kept on living. What quieted it, I said, for her. She thought about this. Ordinary things, she said, very ordinary things, work that had a clear purpose, animals, the sound of water channels. She said the Vareth did not like being the only extraordinary thing in the room. She looked at me with something that was not quite a smile but occupied the same territory. It would settle when there was something else to pay attention to. I thought of the stairwell, the garrison cat, her voice explaining about the brine crust. Yes, I said. The ice made a long, drawn creak as a new shelf of it slid against the older formation. We both looked at it. The sound died away and the harbor went back to its ordinary winter voice. The mooring lines, the distant hammer from the net house, the cry of the saltworks hands on the terrace road. I have not felt the mate bond since before the Vareth surfaced. I know what it is supposed to feel like. My wolf had carried its edge for years. The low, insistent pull that says there is someone and you have not found her yet. The way a tide that has gone too far out still turns. Not because anything commanded it, but because that is what tides do. I had felt it for years, and then the Vareth had come and the bond pull had gone quiet with everything else, and I had assumed it was gone. Another thing the Vareth had taken. Standing on the pier in the winter harbor light, with a circuit assessor looking at the ice as though it were an interesting document, I felt it again. It was not dramatic. It was not sudden. It was the way a sound you have stopped noticing returns when the room goes quiet. You did not realize you had stopped hearing it, and then you realize it is back. I did not speak. I did not move. I did not know what I would have said. She capped her ink bottle. She had taken it out at some point without my noticing, automatic habit, and tucked it back in her coat pocket. I have the morning flat assessment to finish before the light goes, she said. I will need the outfall channel records tomorrow, if Warden Hale can pull them. I will tell him. Thank you. She turned to go and then she stopped. She did not turn back. She said to the harbor or to the ice or to nothing in particular, "It will not always be this quiet here. I know that. But it is quieter than it was. That much is in the garrison hands' faces if you know what to look for." She walked back up the pier. I stayed at the rail a long time. The Vareth did not surface that night, or the next morning, or the afternoon that followed. I began to think about what that meant. What it meant practically. The thing inside me had done something I had not been able to produce in 4 years with routine and managed distance and careful control. It had simply been quiet for 60 hours. Not suppressed. Quiet. The way a sleeping animal is quiet because it is not alarmed, because the room it is in has something real and ordinary in it that is not the thing itself. What it meant beyond the practical, I did not let myself think about that yet. I had learned not to think ahead of what I could actually observe. I started taking the morning walk along the harbor at the time I had noticed she took hers. Not to arrange proximity, I told myself that clearly enough that I almost believed it. I was adjusting my routine for the winter light, which was different at that hour than it had been in the autumn months. On the second morning, we walked the same stretch of harbor road without speaking for 3/4 of the distance, and the quiet between us was not uncomfortable. It was the particular quiet of two people who have already said something real, and are not filling the space around it with lesser things. She pointed out the place where the harbor master's nets hung to dry, and said the mesh gauge was heavier than what she had seen on the Fen Coast circuit, which suggested they were rigging for a different kind of catch, larger fish, or fish that ran deeper, and required more resistance in the net. I said the spring channel had been deepening for 3 years, which was bringing a different population through that had not been part of the northern take before. She said that was interesting and wrote a note in the small book she kept in her left coat pocket, separate from the assessment folio. I had noticed, as though there were two kinds of things worth recording, the official kind and the other kind. "You write 2 records," I said. She glanced up from the small book. "The folio is the circuit record," she said. "The other is observations, things that are interesting but not yet actionable." She closed the book. My grandmother did the same. She said the second record was the one that was actually useful, because by the time you needed to act on something, the folio was already 6 months behind and the small book had the thing you actually needed. "And what goes in the small book from Drevholt?" She looked at the harbor. "The channel ice behaves differently than the formula predicts," she said. "The garrison archive is better organized than any I have seen on this circuit." A pause. "The garrison wolves know something the garrison lord does not know he has already decided." I did not respond to that. She did not seem to expect me to. On the third morning, she stopped at the harbor chandler's to ask about the saltfish preservation method the northern workers used, because it differed from the standard circuit documentation, and she wanted to record it accurately. I stood outside the chandler's door and waited, and when she came out she was writing in the small book, and she said without looking up, "The brine ratio they use here is half again what the southern circuits use. They lose less fish to the midwinter temperature drop. Someone should write that into the standard reference, but no one has." "Will you?" "I will put it in the small book," she said, "and then I will put it in the circuit report recommendation, and then in 4 years it will be in the standard reference if someone reads it." "Someone will read it." She looked up from the small book. "You sound certain." "The Drevholt archive goes back 60 years, I said. "Someone read all of it. Someone built the formula that the outfall channels now prove insufficient. Someone will read your revision too." I stopped. "Records outlast the people who make them. The court secretary who taught me that did not live to see any of his methods still in use. But they are." She looked at me for a moment. Then she wrote something in the small book and put it away. We walked back to the garrison in the morning light, and the Vareth was entirely still, and the bond pool was there in my chest, the way a candle is warm, quietly, without requiring anything from me. On the 4th day of her assessment, I found myself doing something I had not done in 4 years. I sent a message to the Pack Council at Kelrath. Not a long message. Not a message about returning. Simply a message that said, "I am well and the garrison is well, and I will write again in the spring." I do not know entirely why I sent it then. I think some part of me understood that whatever was happening in the garrison at Drevholt, was the kind of thing that asks you to stop pretending you have already left your life behind you and start deciding what you want to do with what remains of it. On the 5th day of her assessment, she came to the archive corridor and knocked, one knock, and I said, "Come in," and she came in and sat down across the table as though she had been doing it for years. The channel rebuilds in the 2nd and 3rd year reduce the outfall variance by almost a third, she said. The levy should reflect that, but the old formula does not account for variance reduction. I am going to note it in the report and recommend an updated formula for the Northern Circuit. That will take time to work through the Assessment Council, I said. Usually 4 years. She opened her folio to a clean page, but the record will be there. Is that enough? It is what I can do from here, she said it without complaint. I do the record accurately. The record stays. Eventually someone reads it. She looked at me for a moment. You keep the archive the same way. I had not thought of it that way. Someone taught me that the record outlasts the person who made it. The court secretary. Yes. We were quiet for a moment. She turned to a new page in her folio. Saren, I said. It was the first time I had used her name. She did not look up immediately. She finished the number she was writing, then she looked up. The Varith, I said. I have not told you what brings it on. You do not have to. I know. I had been thinking about how to say this since the pier. I was still not certain I had the right words, but I had learned in 4 years of not having the right words that having them was not the prerequisite. Disruption, I said. That is the short version. New variables I have not accounted for in advance. People I cannot predict. The feeling that the ordinary structure I have built around myself has been entered unexpectedly. I stopped. You have been in this garrison for 5 days. You have been in the archive twice. You share a wall with my rooms. You knocked on a door I had not expected anyone to knock on. I looked at her across the table. The Varith has not surfaced once. She held her pen above the page and did not write anything. She was looking at me. I think it recognized something it did not need to fight, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, My grandmother used to say that the Varith is not stupid. It knows what is a threat and what is not. The problem is that most of what it encounters is frightened of it, and frightened things behave like threats even when they are not, so it responds accordingly. You are not frightened of it. I grew up with the description of it, she said. I learned it the way you learn any inherited condition in a family, the shape of it, the signs, what helps, what does not. It is not the same as knowing it myself. She paused. But it is not the same as knowing nothing. Most people know nothing. Yes. Through the wall, very faintly, I could hear the south stable, the shift of weight, the low, slow breath of pack wolves in their winter arrangement. They had not come to the tower, but they were there. Your grandmother learned what quieted it, I said, and she stayed in the salt trade her whole life. She was very good at the salt trade, Saren said. Something moved in me, not the Varith, the tide pull. The bond that had come back without announcement on the pier, still quiet, still warm, still doing its low, deliberate work beneath the surface of everything else. I do not know how to do this, I said. She did not pretend not to understand. Do what? Any of it. I have not had anyone in 4 years, in longer than that if I am being precise about it. My wolf carried the bond pull for years and I ignored it because I was a king with more urgent things, and then the Varith came and the bond went quiet. I thought it was gone. I stopped. It is not gone. She held her pen very still. When did you know? The pier, I said, the first morning. She was quiet for a long time. The candle between us burned down a small notch. Outside, the harbor made its winter sounds, the creak of the ice, the low complaint of mooring lines, the call of the saltworks hands beginning the afternoon measurement. All ordinary. All the sounds of a cold, well-run garrison town that did not know it had been doing something to me for 5 days. I have not had anyone either, she said. I moved to the Northern Circuit because it suited what I was. I told myself that was enough. For a long time it was enough. She looked down at her folio and then back up. I am going to be honest with you, because I think you are someone who needs honest more than careful. Yes, I said, I need honest. I do not know what this is, she said. I know I have been in garrison posts for 8 years, and I have never once wanted to stay at the archive table past the records I needed. I know I walked the harbor this morning, and I was paying attention to something other than the channel ice. She set her pen down entirely. I know the garrison cat has been sleeping outside the East Annex door since my second night, and I do not think that was the garrison cat's idea. I knew whose idea it was. My wolf, sitting quietly in whatever space it had found between my usual wariness and whatever this was, doing its low, patient work. I am still the Alpha King of Kelrath, I said. What that means practically I am not certain. The court has not formally dissolved. The packs have not formally defected. But I have been here for 4 years, and the kingdom has been managed in my absence by a council that has largely stopped asking whether I will return. I know, she said. Your name is in the Northern Circuit records as a land-holding garrison lord, not as a reigning king. I noticed. She paused. What are you telling me? That I am not what the title suggests, I said. Not anymore. Whatever I am now is here in this garrison, with wolves that keep their distance and a Vareth that has been quiet for 5 days and an archive I have started caring about again. I looked at her across the table. If you stayed not for the assessment, not for the circuit, if you stayed for a different reason, you would not be staying for what I used to be. She picked up her pen again. She looked at the page, then she looked up. I would be staying for the archive table, she said, and the harbor road in the morning, and someone who knows the bad yield years from memory, a pause, and possibly whatever comes next when the circuit is done. I heard the south stable then, not the usual settling sounds, the shift of weight that is not winter restlessness but intention, the sound I had not heard in 3 years, my wolves moving, not toward the outer court, toward the east side of the stable, toward the tower. Not scratching at the tower door, not requesting entry, simply moving in that direction and settling and going quiet there. The wolves, Saren said, she had heard it too. They are moving toward the tower, I said. Is that new? Yes. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, my grandmother said the Vareth knows before the wolf does, that when the Vareth goes quiet around a person it is because it has already decided. The wolf takes longer. She met my eyes. Your wolf knows. I thought of the tide. The way it turns, not because anything commands it, but because that is what tides do. The way it comes back to the shore it has always returned to, depositing everything the deep water holds without ceremony or announcement, simply doing what it has always been going to do. Yes, I said, my wolf knows. She looked at me for a moment longer. Then she opened her folio to a new page and began to write the outfall channel formula revision, the levy recommendation, the record that would go into the Northern Circuit files and stay there for whoever came after her on this route. I watched her write it. I did not need to speak. The Vareth was still. The bond pull was a steady, low warmth, the way a good fire is warm, present, unhurried, entirely sure of itself. We stayed in the archive until the candle was a stub. The next morning, I was at my window when she came out of the East Annex and walked toward the south stable. I watched her stop at the stable door and open it slowly and go in. When she came out, one of the wolves was with her, not following at a distance. Walking beside her, the old she-wolf, male, the gray-muzzled one who had been with me since Kelrath, who had been in the south stable for 2 years without once coming to the east tower. Male walked beside Saren out through the stable yard and into the main garrison court, and when Saren stopped at the water trough, the wolf sat down next to her and looked up at her with the steady, unhurried attention of an animal that has made a decision and intends to see it through. I came downstairs. I have not come down to the garrison court in the ordinary morning way, the way I used to, when I was a king and my pack gathered and the morning was something shared, in 4 years. I came down the tower stairs, one hand on the wall for a moment at the third step, but the Varith was entirely still, and I continued down through the low door and out into the court. Saren looked up when she heard the door. Mael looked up too. Then Mael stood and moved to my side and sat down again, and for the first time in 2 years she leaned her weight against my leg. I put my hand on her head. Saren watched this. Her expression was the one she had when she was looking at a channel formation that was doing something interesting, careful attention, quiet warmth. She is the oldest, she said. 26 years, I said. She came with me from Kelrath. Does she have a name? Mael, I said, old border word. It means the still water in a cove, between the tide and the land, where neither is entirely dominant. Saren looked at Mael with something that had gone past careful attention into something warmer. Hello, Mael, she said. Mael leaned harder into my leg and regarded Saren with the placid authority of a wolf who has decided how things are going to go and is waiting for the rest of us to catch up. By midday, all 3 wolves were in the court. By afternoon, 2 of them had followed Saren to the first terrace for the final cross-check of the channel measurements, and Hale had found me on the gallery wall and stood beside me without comment for several minutes. She is finishing the assessment today, he said. Yes. The circuit schedule has her leaving at first light tomorrow. I watched Saren move along the terrace edge with the measuring cord, the wolves pacing at the patient distance of animals that have somewhere to be and know it. The winter light was flat and clean, the kind that makes the salt flats look like hammered metal. What would it take, I said, to add a posting rider to the circuit office? Hale was quiet for a moment. For the Northern Circuit, a posting request goes to the circuit second at Fellport. 4-day turnaround in winter, 2 in spring. A pause. Posting requests come from the local Lord of Record. I am the local Lord of Record. You are. A posting request was not a claiming. It was a professional document. It said, the assessor assigned to this district requires additional assignment time for complex formula revision. It said nothing about the archive table or the harbor road or the wolves. It was entirely ordinary, and I had learned in 4 years that ordinary things were exactly right. Draft the request, I said. I will sign it this afternoon. He went. I stayed on the wall and watched the wolves follow Saren along the last terrace, and the winter light made everything very clear. The terraces and the channels and the harbor beyond, and the ice on the North Channel making its deliberate push, the way ice always does, turning back toward the sea that sent it. I signed the posting request that afternoon. Hale sent it to Fellport by the evening rider. Saren knew about the posting by the dinner hour, because Hale is not a man who withholds information from the people it concerns. She came to the archive door and knocked 1 knock, and I said come in, and she came in and sat across the table. The posting request, she said. Yes. What does it ask for? A 6-month secondary assignment, pending circuit office approval. I paused. It is a reasonable request. The Drevholt channels are complex, and the formula revision will need on-site calibration. That is the official reason. It is a good reason, I said. It will survive review. A silence, and the other reason. The tide, I said. What I told you about on the pier. She looked at me in the way she looked at things she was deciding about, not uncertain, simply deliberate. Then, if the circuit office approves the posting and I stay, what does that mean? It means 6 months, I said, and then whatever comes after that if you want anything to come after. I stopped. I am not asking you to take on what I carry because of a bond. I am asking because you told me ordinary things quieted it, And the most ordinary thing I can imagine is someone across this table recapping their ink bottle and thinking about channel formulas. She was very still. Then she said, "Breck." It was the first time she had used my name. "Yes. The posting request is good," she said. "The channel formula genuinely needs calibration." She looked at her hands, then back up. "6 months will tell us what we need to know." "Yes," I said, "it will." In the spring, the circuit office approved the posting. The approval came by rider on a cold morning in early thaw, when the salt flat channels were running again for the first time in 3 months, and Saren was on the north terrace with her measuring cord checking the volume. I read the approval notice in the archive, and then I went to the window and watched her work. And for the first time in 4 years, the East Tower did not feel like a place I had retreated to. It felt like a place I had arrived at. In the spring, the other 2 wolves moved their sleeping place to the East Tower corridor, not at the annex door, not at my door, but in the corridor between, where the lamplight from both rooms would reach them. They did this without announcement, without ceremony, simply moving their bedding arrangement from the south stable to the corridor one evening, and being there when I came downstairs the next morning. Hale looked at them and then at me and said nothing. Some things do not require comment. 2 young wolves came down from the Pack Road in April, young ones from the Kelrath border territories, following something their blood told them, the way pack wolves sometimes do when the pull in a bloodline becomes strong enough to override the usual boundaries of territory and distance. They arrived at the garrison gate, and the gate guard let them in because wolves who arrive at a garrison gate looking for something are generally wolves who have found what they were looking for, and arguing with them is a waste of everyone's time. They have not left. In the spring, Saren told me about the years on the western posting, before the northern circuit, the larger garrison towns, the more complicated levies, the pack politics that seeped into every assessment and made the record-keeping twice as difficult because half the figures you were given were politically rather than practically accurate. She told me about her grandmother's cottage on the East Coast, the one that still held the second record, the small book of observations, going back 40 years, the kind of record a salt assessment family keeps the way other families keep letters. She told me she had 3 of the small books with her, because she had been keeping them since she was 17. I told her about the iron ceremony, not all of it, because some of it I still do not have the language for, but enough. The moment the binding broke, the thing that came through the door the binding had been keeping shut. The first night in the East Tower at Kelrath, which I do not describe even now, because the garrison hands who were there do not speak of it either, and some things are better left without a formal record. She listened the way she listened to everything, steadily, with the air of someone who is building an accurate picture and will not settle for a partial one. The binding broke because the bloodline had reached its limit, she said, when I had finished. Not because something went wrong in the ceremony. The suppression the old Kelrath kings built into the line was finite. It had always been finite. It was going to break in you or in your children or in theirs. The text suggests the same thing, I said. I found it in the 3rd year. And it did not help to know. It helped somewhat, I said. It helped to know I had not done something to cause it, that it was not a consequence of something I had failed to do. I paused. It does not help with the furniture. She looked at me, and this time the thing that occupied the territory near a smile actually reached it. The furniture, she said. I have replaced the archive table twice, I said, and the study table, and one of the window shutters, though that was more the wall near the shutter than the shutter itself. And now, the last surface event was 6 months ago, I said. The archive table has survived. Because the archive table has something across it now, she said. Yes, I said, because the archive table has something across it now. The Vareth has surfaced 3 times since the summer and twice since the autumn, because it is what it is, and it will always be what it is, and I stopped expecting otherwise sometime in the early spring. but I have 7 minutes of warning and a woman who knows the shape of it from her grandmother's description and her own careful observation. And when the heat comes to my hands, she says they're now in the same voice she used with the garrison cat, and the thing inside me decides, as it always decides around her, that there is nothing here that requires it. 3 years of careful distance and managed routine produced less quiet than one woman with an ink bottle, and a second record for the things that are interesting, but not yet actionable. I wrote to the Kelrath Council again in early summer, a longer message. Not about returning. Kelrath has its council and its governance, and has managed both for 4 years without me, and the packs are not poorly served. But a message that said, the Alpha King of Kelrath is at Drevholt and is well, and the garrison there is well run, and the salt flats are assessed by a circuit officer who is rigorous and thorough, and has revised a formula that the Northern Circuit has needed revising for 40 years. The council wrote back. They did not ask me to come home. They asked whether the Northern Channel variance formula applied to the Eastern posts as well, because their own yield figures had been showing anomalies for 2 seasons. I sent them Saren's working notes with her permission. She said the East Coast channels would need their own calibration, but the principle was the same. Saren filed the formula revision with the Northern Circuit Assessor's record. The record is there now, clearly attributed, available to anyone who comes after her on this route. It is already in use in 3 posts on the Winter Circuit. In 4 years, as she predicted, as she noted in the assessment folio without complaint, it will be in the standard reference. We married at the harbor's edge on a morning in early summer, when the ice was gone from the North Channel, and the salt flats were white and clean, and running with the first warm water of the season. The 5 wolves were there. Hale stood behind us in his good coat with the expression of a man who has seen something coming for several months, and is glad to have been right about it. There was no court, no ceremony with a silver circlet and a lunanaming before the assembled lords of Kelrath. I have not returned to Kelrath, and Kelrath has rearranged itself around my absence the way a harbor rearranges itself around a vessel that has been docked so long it has become part of the landscape. The council governs. The packs hold their territory. The Alpha King of Kelrath is, technically, still a legitimate title. The man who holds it is at the salt flat edge with his hand in the hand of a woman who is not afraid of what lives inside him. The words we said were plain and specific. I said, "You stayed for the channel formula and the archive table, and I am asking you to stay for longer than 6 months, and I will spend the rest of my life being worth staying for." She said, "The tide turns for what the tide has always meant to reach, and I have been on the Northern Circuit for 8 years, and this is the first time a posting has felt like arriving somewhere." Mail came forward when we had finished speaking. All 5 wolves, coming forward in the quiet way of animals that have decided something and are done deliberating. They stood around us in a half-circle facing the harbor, and the morning light came off the salt flats and off the water, and everything was very clear and very ordinary and exactly right. The Vareth, when it surfaces now, surfaces in a garrison that has 2 people in it who know its shape. It knows, as Saren's grandmother knew it would know, what is a threat and what is not. What it is not: a woman at the archive table with her ink bottle, getting the record right. A gray muzzle leaning against a leg in the morning court. A lamp in the East Annex window, visible from the tower stairs, burning steady through the winter dark. What the tide does when it has gone out as far as it goes is turn, not because anyone commanded it, because that is what tides do. That is what I am now at Drevholt, not the thing that surfaces in the stairwell, the tide that turns.